Hello from my sunny home in Belgium. I can't get out because of COVID-19. I can't go to the Flex Museum, which is in this town. I can't go and visit the Flex Cutting windmill, which is opened to the public by volunteers. That's the effect of the sudden and virulent outbreak of the COVID-19, which caused panic in the world of culture and heritage. Because all the certainties we seemed to have are falling away. No more visitors, no more income, and the fear that public authorities won't have sufficient resources and lifeboats to safely land those who are navigating through a severe storm. While industrial heritage is, of course, not the priority of public authorities. The problems of the industrial heritage sector are not fundamentally different from the problems the other heritage sectors have and are facing at. So there is one difference. If a choice has to be made between preserving a castle or an old factory, between an art museum and an industrial museum, it's in advance often clear who is going to win the prize. In many places, industrial archaeology is still used as a pejorative term for something one would be better off without. In the current COVID-19 context, it's also clear that the attention of the public authorities goes first and foremost to saving big institutions, the places and institutes that attract the most attention and that also attract most visitors, let's say tourists. It's not only the institution an sich which has to be saved, but also the jobs, the direct and the indirect jobs. It's the economy that counts. Those big institutions might have to slow down a bit, but at the end, they won't go into bankruptcy. IFATE, or European Federation of Associations of Industrial and Technical Heritage, is especially committed to the small, independent, voluntary associations, the grassroots peoples, and the organizations that always have played a major role in the development of our sector. Is the situation for them as serious as it's said and been told for the big money-consuming organizations and institutions? To some extent, indeed. What do these small organizations, what do volunteers represent for industrial heritage? Just to say, we can't without them. One thing is certain, if these associations and if the volunteers disappear, the heritage landscape will look very different, impoverished, less diversified, less active, and often less creative. What's the real threat to the humble ones? Well, they are responsible for their earnings, for their own income, for making their money. Subsidies, if any, are often minimal. It seems that they are foremost endangered, because now no visitors, no income from tickets, no income from the bar, no income from the souvenir shop. Also, there are big differences between European countries, depending on their general policy and culture. The smaller associations today seem to be forgotten in the average COVID picture. It's certain that for them, today there is little or no public support, no bridging loans, no assumption of costs. Around 2010, some 10 years ago, IFATE carried out a survey among its contacts. we asked about 130 organizations, which revealed that then, and these are figures of 10 years ago, most organizations, with the exception of those managing a site or a museum, had an annual budget of less than 10,000 euros, with a median around 7,000 euros. That more than 2/3 of the militant organizations were not subsidized. That most of the subsidized organizations were mainly subsidized only for investment costs, for example restorations, but not for operating costs. Maybe it surprises you, but one small museum replied at that moment that their annual operation budget fluctuated around 12,000 euros. Of course, that didn't pay any staff. The museum was run very efficiently and successfully by volunteers, the non-paid professionals. What's the situation at present, after about 2 to 3 COVID months? Here are some randomly selected examples. Case 1. A voluntary association, an NGO, manages a paper mill and derives its income mainly from school trips, renting out rooms, and a cafeteria which is leased to a pub manager. Their high season runs from Easter until the end of June. At present, there are no more group visits expected until the end of June, which means a loss of 50 to 60% of ticket revenues. The cafeteria manager no longer has any customers and asks to be exempted from rents during the lockdown period, which is an expected loss of 15%. The operating staff, 3 full-time equivalents, are temporarily unemployed, but part of the unemployment allowance has to be paid by the association. All planned investment and restoration projects for this year are removed from the program. They need to restore the steam boiler, and as a result of this, the site loses its main attraction in the future, a running steam engine. Of course, the volunteers will remain active, but will not be able during the lockdown period to carry out any of the necessary work on the site. Case 2. A not-for-profit trust restored and managed a historic building in an attractive harbour area and converted it into a very popular cultural centre, with party and exhibit halls, meeting rooms, etc. The NGO organizes its own activity, but mainly derives its income from renting out rooms to third parties. Until the 31st of August, all activities are at a standstill, and for the autumn, about half of the activities and contracts have already been cancelled. For the months of March and April, they calculated already a loss of turnover of 66.2%. May has not yet been taken into account, and in 2020 a loss of turnover of minimum 90% is expected. All staff has made unemployed. All charges, included taxes to be paid, continue to accrue. The maintenance and restoration program they had, and some of it is very urgent, has been put on hold, and resources now have to be used for a survival strategy. Of course, the volunteers remain committed, but they have not been able to come to the site in recent months, and they ask themselves what comes after. It can be seen as a disaster for all major organizations, many of which lived above their means, in the expectation that the number of visitors, subsidies, sponsorship, income would continue to rise and rise and rise. COVID-19 will affect the voluntary associations less than the professional organizations with paid staff. As in the case of the NGOs, staff costs are often representing only a small part of the budget, in some cases as much as 0%. Now, how to deal with this? Can volunteers solve the crisis? The danger then lurks around the corner of what Kenneth Hudson already 40 years ago described as using volunteers as coolies. It's also certain that we will make more use of new technologies. Virtual meetings and webinars are becoming common. Virtual visits are moving up. Yes, but for what purpose? With what intention will we step into the virtual and cyberspace? I still hear Barry Lord teaching. The USP, unique selling position of heritage, is the real thing. And once Kenneth Hudson said, what would be the most impressive? Looking at a model of St. Paul's Cathedral, all standing under its dome and looking upwards. Indeed, what would be the most impressive? Watching a video or looking through virtual glasses to a virtual animation of a beam engine, all standing next to it, feeling the vibrations of the ground and the movement, the smell of oil and the warmth of steam. COVID-19 is forcing us to think and to ask questions about what we are doing, why we are doing it, and how we are doing it. In an era of fewer possibilities and resources, we now have to think out of the box. How to do more with less. And that's something that volunteers and voluntary associations always have been good at. Instead of the more and more, the alternative will probably be less but better. A focus on quality. What's the purpose of heritage preservation, interpretation, and presenting it to the public? Do we prefer to offer our public a quick hamburger or a nice, tasty, and well-served dinner? Heritage, in my opinion, stands for quality of the places where people live and work. Maybe we should, not in nostalgia, but with a critical and historical eye, look back at from where we came. Reflect on the early years of industrial archaeology, when no public money was spent in abundance, when there were few or no professionals. There were associations. Out of their enthusiasm grew what today's industrial heritage world is. It would be a pity if COVID, in spite of the echoes we have heard so far, would make the already active volunteers drop out in frustration when their project goes under. To be or not to be, will the industrial heritage survive? Of course it will. As long as we can motivate people that industrial heritage is an important issue, that it's an important part of our past, and that it's important for our future, And why it's important. Industrial heritage will survive. As long as there are those well boys and girls who want to dedicate themselves independently and in an enthusiastic way to that heritage. As long as there are volunteers, industrial heritage will survive.